In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can set up the different types of data we are exporting from command, as well as what format that data is going to take place. First of all types of data can be exported either real-time as the scenario is run using the regular GUI, or it can be exported doing a Monte Carlo analysis. A Monte Carlo analysis can also be done for the purposes of command line or using the GUI that we have here. Basically, when you're going to be setting up data, there's going to be two parts to it. The first one is going to be selecting what data you want, and then the second one is going to be selecting how you're going to produce that data. In our case, if we take a look at our main installation folder, if we make our way to the config folder and go down to the event export.ini folder, this will give us the ability to select the different options that we want to do both real-time as well as what items we want. For example, if I take a look right here, anything under active exporter will be any sort of data that will be exported as we're going. If you actually take a look in our main program here, you can see that when we have diagnostics enabled, we can actually see how much data is being written to that file at this time. Now, for example, I wanted to go ahead and also export this data to XML. I can simply type in XML here, and now when I run the scenario in real time, it will be exporting both of these items to a folder that we have in the main one called analysis int. Now, after we've selected the different types of exports that we're doing in real time, we can then come down here and select exactly what data we'd like. So for example, I would like to go ahead and separate my files by sides. I would like to go ahead and ignore anything as far as any kind of sensor detections. I would like to see a fire, and I do not need the positions because if we do the unit positions, that's going to tend to slow things down, but this could be very, very critically important depending on what you're doing. I'm not interested in the engagement cycle, and I'm not interested in any sort of fuel transfer in this particular time. Keep in mind, each one of these is going to be broken down by what particular thing you are exporting. For example, if I'm exporting things to CSV, these are the items that will be exported to CSV. If I'm exporting to XML also, I need to make sure that whatever I have here makes sense for what I have here. Now, if I wanted to, I could set it up so that the XML files are receiving a different item than the CSV files. For example, if I came down here and said, we want the positions in XML, but we don't want any more of the other data that we have on the previous side for the purposes of doing any sort of analysis here. Again, different formats are going to make it a little bit easier to work with, and different formats are going to make it a little more difficult to work with. Keep in mind that anything you set here as far as your settings are also going to show up in your Monte Carlo analysis regardless of what you're going to see on the side of that screen. So in our particular case here, we'll go ahead and I'll clean this up a little bit. I'll set that to true. I don't want to see anything about positions. I would like to see nothing about fuel transfer, no error operations, and I would like to consolidate the CSV into a single file to make my life simpler. So now if I press save and were to reopen this program, it would immediately start writing to the two different files. In this case, just to keep the cycles of the computer down a little bit, we're going to go ahead and set that to just the one. Now, if I wanted to and use something like a SQLite server, I would have to make my way down to the bottom and I'd have to define all my SQL Server settings. Keep in mind that you're going to have to make sure that you use the appropriate batch size as well as the appropriate name for the server and make sure that service is running on your computer prior to attempting to connect to that system. So now that we've taken a look at what items we're actually going to export, now it's simply going to be a matter of exporting it. Now, if we had set this all up and then restarted command, we'd have the ability to go ahead and run the scenario and actually be writing that data on the fly. Now, sometimes you want to run a different type of analysis. So I'm going to go up to Editor. I'm going to go to Monte Carlo Analysis. We'll go into a little more detail with Monte Carlo Analysis a little later on. But note that when I press Export and Recording, any of those options I selected in my event export file are going to be the items that are exported into these particular selections I make here. So for example, if I wanted to say that we want to do XML only here, the XML checkbox here will be taking the XML settings off of this file for the purposes of actually doing it. Keep in mind that if we want to do the command line version of this, this file will need to be written specifically in order so that it can actually know what settings it's going to need to use for the purposes of exporting. Once your export has been completed, depending on what technique that you used for it, you're going to find a file or a folder or a database with the data that you've gone ahead and created inside of the appropriate folder. Keep in mind that each time the data is run or each time the analysis is run, it will overwrite all the existing data that you have in that folder. So keep that in mind whenever you're running. Another thing worth noting too is if you run multiple iterations of a scenario, you're going to see multiple of these little folders with a numbered item for each specific iteration that you've completed.